Right. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you hear me?
Assalamu alaikum.
Just testing the sound and the lights is clear.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Auda. Yeah, we can
Walaikum.
see you.
You can see me. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. And hear me clearly.
Yes.
And I can hear you as well. And I tried to share. Is this Prof Zulkifli?
No,
Oh, no, that's brother. How are you?
yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to
That's
share your wisdom.
it's my honor. I can share the screen, right? Yeah, I can. Okay, good.
Yes. Yes.
So we're all ready. Inshallah.
So we'll just wait a little while for others.
As you wish. As you wish.
Yeah. Thank you.
Once Prof Zulkifli is here, let me know. I would like to greet him. And no problem. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you also. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everyone.
Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everyone.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
I'd like to also welcome Dean Julkipli Wadi of the Institute of Islamic Studies. Dr. Auda, our Dean, is already here. So, welcome to our webinar on Quran and Contemporary Islamic Studies. My name is Darwin Absari, and I'll be your moderator for today. And to formally start our program, may I call one of our lecturers, Ustaz Lukman, the Sharia counselor, to lead the opening prayer.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Arrahmanir rahim. Maliki yaumiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. Amin. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. All the praises and thanks be to Allah, the Lord of the Alameen, the most beneficent, the most merciful, the sovereign of the day of recompense. You alone we worship, and you alone we seek for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those upon whom you have bestowed favor, not of those who have evoked your anger, nor of those who are astray. Allahumma alif baina qulubina wa aslih dhata bainina wahdina subulas salam wa najjina minadh dhulumati ilan nur wa jannibna al-fawahisha ma zahara minha wa ma batan wa barik lana fi asma'ina wa absarina wa qulubina wa azwajina wa dhurriyyatina wa tub alayna innaka antat tawwabur rahim waj'alna syakirina li ni'matika musnina biha qabiliha wa atimmaha alayna. O Allah, unite our hearts and set aright our mutual affairs. Guide us in the path of peace. Liberate us from the darkness by your light. Save us from enormities, whether open or hidden. Bless us in our ears, eyes, hearts, spouses, and children. Turn to us. Truly you are oft returning, most merciful. Make us grateful for your bounty and full of praise for it, so that we may continue to receive it and complete your blessings upon us. Allahumma inna nas'aluka al-afiyah fi dunya wal akhirah. Allahumma inna nas'aluka al-afwa wal afiyah fi dinina wa dunyana wa ahlina wa malina. Allahumma astur awratana wa amin rawatana. Allahumma hafadhna min bayni aydina wa min khalfina wa an yaminina wa an shimalina wa min fawqina wa na'udhu bi'azamatika an naqtala min tahtina. Allahumma amin. O Allah, we ask you wellness in this life and the hereafter. O Allah, we ask you your pardon and wellness in my religion, in our religion, life, family, and property. O Allah, hide our mistakes and make our fears peaceful. O Allah, protect what is between our hands, what is behind us, what is on our right and what is on our left, what is above us and we seek protection in your magnificence that we are consumed by what is underneath us. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.
Thank you so much, Ustaz Lukman. We are blessed today to have our esteemed speaker, and we thank God for this blessing and opportunity to learn from the wisdom of our speaker. And we also thank him for agreeing to share his wisdom. But this webinar would not have been possible without the facilitation of our brother and partner, Engineer Usama Al-Azuni, the founder of the International Center for Social Research, Peace and Development in the Philippines. So thank you also, Brother Usama. At this point, I'd like to call our Dean for his welcome remarks. Dean of the Institute of Islamic Studies, Professor Julkipli Wadi. Sir.
Maybe he has some technical difficulty or something.
Dean Wadi. I think his internet signal is problem.
Maybe there is, yeah.
Hello, Dash.
Okay. Yes,
Can you
sir.
hear me, Dash?
Yes.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
First of all, it's nice to see in person, even if it is virtual, Dr. Professor Jasser Auda. Alhamdulillah, we now see in person and would be able to converse amongst ourselves. Secondly, I'd like to also thank our Ustaz, Engineer Usama Azuni, and of course, our participants who are now with us, and many are still coming in. Now, so that we would reduce the stress that Professor Auda has possibly experienced in preparing this lecture. We are all familiar with this experience. So temper your to our participants, kindly temper your excitement. I hope that this would not be just the first of our engagement with Professor Auda. So we have lots of time in not only today, but in the future, inshallah. Now, before I read the short bio notes or biography of our speaker, allow me to share some experiences, perhaps animated with the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he says, "Al-ulama warasatul anbiya." It states the central positions of the learned and the scholars as successors of prophets. At times, we are not only, in a sense, satisfied with just reading their works, but we develop our desire to see them, talk to them in person. And I would like to highlight some kind of serendipity, a kind of an aha experience where one finds what he has been looking for years in a manner that he has not necessarily struggled for it, but it's just that that thing or person would just appear right before him. That desire to see and to talk in person scholars had been ingrained, I think, amongst us. So the first one was when I came to the institute many years ago, where I wanted to see the first dean of the institute, Dean Cesar Adib Mahul. But he has left the University of the Philippines 10 years before I arrived, before I came to the institute. Lo and behold, in some mysterious ways, I was able to visit him in his residence in California. And he did not only receive me, but I stayed with him for 3 days in his residence. That's number one. Number two, I had that desire to see, at least shake hands with a known alim of Malaysia, Dr. Said Nakib Al-Attas. Also in some mysterious ways, by attending a conference in Kuala Lumpur, a friend invited me to attend one of his lectures, and I was able to meet Said Nakib Al-Attas. There is still one that I wanted to meet. He is a British Muslim scholar by the name of Ziauddin Sardar. In my view, he's one of our prolific authors and writers of our time, but I think that serendipity has not yet come. Now, the fourth one is a kind of serendipity that I think Professor Auda would be interested. It was in 2013 when I was on travel to attend a conference in Medina. There was an international conference organized by then Prince Salman bin Abdul Aziz, where I was invited. I was on transit and I was at the Riyadh airport, and I happened to browse some books in a bookstore. And I found 3 books which are really captivated me. One is the book of Robert Fisk, The Great War for Civilization. This is the book. And the second book is Islam in the Modern World of Hussein Nasser. And the third one is the book of Professor Auda, The Maqasid, Sharia as Philosophy of Islamic Law. When I look at my wallet, however, it was not enough. I don't have enough fund to buy all the 3 books, but I had the inkling that I had to get the 2 books. That is Fisk, The Great War of Civilization, and Professor Auda, Auda's book. And I was enthralled by the comprehensiveness of Professor Auda's presentation, so that even in between sessions, I was reading Professor Auda's book. And I returned to the Philippines, even giving a copy to our library. And since then, I had been dreaming to meet Professor Auda in person. But before I'll go into that part, after my arrival in the Philippines and here in the university, a friend of mine who was assigned in the Middle East, was working at the Department of Labor, for some unknown reasons, came with me and brought with me this copy of book of Professor Hussein Nasser. That is, he completes what I'd initially desired at that bookstore in Riyadh. But my desire to meet Professor Auda remains. Then, after some time, I was informed by our former dean, Professor Macrina Morados, that their lecturer at a conference in America was Professor Auda. So I was enlightened to know that probably it's not far-fetched that we'll be able to meet with Professor Auda. Now, a few months ago, we had a visitor, our Ustad's engineer, Usama Azuni, and we talked many things, and we happened to talk about Professor Auda, and he informed us that Professor Auda is his friend, so that was the connection. He facilitated our meeting, our conversation in the social media, and this is the reason why we are having this webinar. But lastly, when I was reading the works of Professor Auda, including the recent materials that he shared, it is really in symmetry with what we are doing at the Institute as we are engaged in curriculum development. So in fact, two weeks ago, we were in a discussion with all the faculty members of how to develop our curriculum because of the demands of the university to have our QA or quality assurance of our institute. In fact, next week, we will be having another curriculum discussion. So indeed, this serendipity, this aha experience with Professor Auda is something that is part, I think, of our faith. Our Professor Auda talks about spirituality, I think, in many of his work, some kind of a grand design that we have to meet with each other, particularly even if it is virtual with Professor Auda. So that is why I could not help express my appreciation upon knowing him, and now he is with us. Now let me read few of his value notes. Professor Jasser Auda is a scholar of Islam. His latest contribution is a new Maqasid methodology that aims to bring about a restructuring of Islamic scholarship around a complex network of the higher objectives, Maqasid of the Quran, and prophetic traditions. He is the president of Maqasid Institute Global, a think tank registered in building research and educational projects in a number of countries. He is Al-Shatibi Chair of Maqasid Studies at the International Peace University in South Africa, a founding and board member of the International Union for Muslim Scholars, an executive member of the Fiqh Council of North America, a member of the European Council of Fatwa and Research, and the chairman of the Canadian Fiqh Council. He has a PhD in the philosophy of Islamic law from the University of Wales, UK, and a PhD in systems analysis from the University of Waterloo, Canada. Early in his life, he memorized the Quran and undertook traditional studies at the study circles of Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, Egypt. He worked previously as a professor at the Universities of Waterloo, Ryerson, and Carleton in Canada, Alexandria University in Egypt, Faculty of Islamic Studies, Qatar, American University of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates, and University of Brunei Darussalam. Brunei professor and in Brunei. Professor Auda lectured on Islam and its laws in dozens of countries and wrote 25 books in Arabic and English, some of which were translated to 25 languages. So that is Professor Auda. Professor, you have now the floor, inshallah.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaykum assalam.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. Prof Dhul-Kifli, I mean, this is very humbling, the introduction you made, and a very generous introduction of you. And I'm your brother in Islam. We can meet anytime and we can talk anytime. And I am a servant of the Ummah, and therefore I am a servant of whatever you think I could contribute to, inshallah. I am very happy to be speaking at University of the Philippines, the Institute of Islamic Studies. It was also one of my dreams and hopes to speak at the Philippines and to Muslims and Muslim scholars and students and people who are interested in Islam in the Philippines. I have spoke and visited and actually lived in several places in Southeast Asia, except for the Philippines, from Brunei to Malaysia and Indonesia and Singapore and Thailand, North and South and everywhere, and actually Indonesia, East and West, and Malaysia, East and West, and so forth. Subhanallah, it's the only country in Southeast Asia where there's a population of Muslims that I have not visited yet. So inshallah, this comes as soon as I leave here. I'm speaking to you from the city of Toronto in Canada. As soon as I am in Asia, I'll make sure, inshallah, that I'm honored with a visit.
Inshallah, Ustaz.
And
Thank you
I
so
am
much.
very excited at the similarities, alhamdulillah, that we have in terms of thought. And I am very happy to know that the writings that I write and the ideas that I try to promote have a kind of a matching with what you are trying to do with Islamic studies, because Islamic studies could be many things. And it's very important that we meet, inshallah, true scholars of Islam who are trying to use Islamic studies for the sake of humanity and for the sake of the betterment of people. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent messengers and books. قد أرسلنا رسلنا بالبينات وأنزلنا معهم الكتاب والميزان ليقوم الناس بالقسط. Allah said in Surah Al-Hadid, He revealed the book and the messengers, and He brought down the scale so that people could establish equity, establish justice. So establishing justice is not just for Muslims, it's for everybody, and it's for humanity, whether they are believers or not. This is what Islam is here to do. I am honored as well that the topic is the Quran and Islamic studies, because the Quran is the heart of the Islamic scholarship. If you want to talk Islamic scholarship proper, then you should be talking about the Quran, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is at the heart of what Islam is about and what the deen, religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is about. I have some slides I would like to share with you for this topic. It's a long topic, and usually we cover that in the Maqasid Institute, or where we teach graduate studies, we cover that over a course. But I will try to be brief to give you the highlights of how we can link Al-Quran, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with Islamic studies, so that Islamic studies is genuine and is useful and is contemporary and is ethical, and Islamic studies could, inshallah, contribute what it is supposed to be contributing, the purpose of Islamic studies. I'm just going to share. I hope you can see my slides. So I am happy that this is the topic, because we often ask about Islamic studies without thinking about the source of knowledge. And the Quran is our source of knowledge for humanity, as I mentioned, not just for Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the first pages of the Quran says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people. And therefore, this talk that I am talking, I'm aware that perhaps all of you might be Muslim, but this talk is for humanity, is for everybody who would like to believe in Allah and make their lives a better life. The Quran is a source of knowledge in that sense, and you cannot bring a Quranic approach unless you believe in the story that appeared on that mountain of Hira in Mecca, where the Prophet ﷺ, on the other side of that mountain, was facing the desert, not facing the city of Mecca, and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the angel came to him and said, Iqra, Iqra, read. This is the book that starts with read. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who created. And if you read from the Quran from the beginning, it says Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah. So we are reading in the name of Allah, in the sense that that Quran has authority. That Quran is not any book, is not like anything, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking. And there is no other book in any religion that we know of where actually God is speaking from the beginning to the end. It is not Muhammad speaking. It is not somebody narrating somebody that so-and-so said. We have this and we call it hadith, and that's a different story. But the Quran is Allah speaking, is your Lord who created you speaking through an angel that he sent to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on that mountain. And this is not just for spirituality. When you look at Islamic knowledge and people think about Islam, some Muslims, or actually many Muslims, define Islam in terms of spirituality. And that is a secular definition of Islam. Secularism, laïcité in French. I'm here in Canada, therefore English and French. Whether you're speaking in the English or the French versions of the European languages, people developed secularism from the world. We call it in Arabic al-almaniyya, from al-alam, from the world, the material truth. And therefore, religion in the secular worldview is about metaphysics, is about what's beyond physics. And physics is the truth, and metaphysics is the area of what they call myth in the secular worldview. Islam is not like that. Islam doesn't have physics and metaphysics. Islam, everything is physics, but there is hidden and there is seen or witnessed. Al-shahada and al-ghayb. Al-shahada is the witness. I witness certain things, and then the next generations of humanity might witness things that we did not witness as humans, but they're all there. And the next generation might witness something else or discover something else. In that sense, knowledge is discovered. It's not really created. And there is ghaib, or unseen, in the first page of Surah Al-Baqarah, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. And we believe in the unseen. We believe in the part of the reality that is not seen by our five senses, and that is different from believing that this part of reality doesn't exist. You see, the secular worldview doesn't believe that something exists unless you have a proof from the five senses. We believe that what the Quran talks about exists, and that our reality is subject to the reality of the Quran, not the other way around. What we see in the world is a dream, only confirmed by what the Quran is saying. That is for a believer, and that's what a believer's heart would feel about the reality. And therefore, when we talk about Islamic knowledge, we're not really talking about spirituality. Spirituality is one branch of Islamic knowledge, usually called the tasawwuf, or the suluk, or fiqh al-qalb, the fiqh of the heart, or Sufism, and that is a major branch of knowledge of Islam. But Islam is not just about spirituality. Islam is about every understanding of every phenomena, and every understanding of every discipline, and every approach to every human invention of ideas. And therefore, the Quranic definition of knowledge has to do with ilm and fiqh and deen. Ilm is knowledge, is information. Alima, ya'lamu, ma'luma is information, literally. And when you talk about fiqh, is a deep understanding. We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about some people going and seeking fiqh, seeking deep understanding. And that fiqh is in the deen. And deen in Islam is not religion. Deen is a way of life. ما كان لأخذ أخاه في دين الملك. I'll go back to the Quran. You'll see me reciting the Quran all the time, because that's our source of knowledge now. So when we talk about deen, the Latin religio is about a pact of men who have a particular worldview on God, Islam doesn't define deen like that. Deen is a way of life, is a worldview, is how we define things. So when Allah said, لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ, so that they seek deep understanding in the deen or the way of life, then this is Islam, and this is Islamic knowledge. Therefore, Islamic studies is not a discipline under humanities, under theology, under religions, world religions, comparative, and then you find Islamic studies. From the Islamic point of view, yes, this is how you study in Western academia. And my brother, Prof Kifli, mentioned that I studied in Western academia and taught as well. But from the Islamic point of view, Islam is not just a discipline. And Islam is not just a multidisciplinary approach. Islam is a transdisciplinary approach. Islam is above disciplines. Islam tells you how to think about humanities and natural sciences and social sciences and applied sciences. Islam has something to say about history and mathematics and anthropology and physics and social sciences and psychology and arts. Islam is not necessarily giving you the curve that you find in an economics book, but Islam tells you how to think about economics, how to define money, wealth, what does it mean to trade, etc. So it shapes your worldview about an area that we call today economics. And therefore, when we look at Islamic studies and we try to think about that, we should think about that source of knowledge, and that this is beyond spirituality and metaphysics and stuff into what we call in Islam fiqh, or deep understanding. And yes, fiqh is not just the law. Now the fuqaha are only people who are experts in the law, jurists. But actually, jurists is not the right translation of fuqaha. Fuqaha are experts. And you could be a faqih in architecture or psychology or politics as much as you are a faqih in law or criminal law or family law. But we limited what fiqh is about into a number of areas. And that in the Islamic world has to do with the long history of colonization that actually changed the governing systems of Muslims from being Islamic. So you build a city based on an Islamic worldview, you open a hospital based on an Islamic definition of medicine, you do geography or you do zoology based on Islam. You read the books of the Islamic civilization, and all of this was based on Islam. And all of these are books of fiqh. We have books titled Fiqh al-Amara or al-Amara, the fiqh of architecture, Fiqh al-Tib, the fiqh of medicine, Fiqh al-Siyasa, Sharia, the fiqh of siyasa, of politics, Fiqh al-Mal, the fiqh of economy, and so forth. But colonization did not like that. Colonization of the Muslim majority regions of the world wanted to secularize the Muslim life in order for Muslims to practice Islam as a religio, the Latin religio. And therefore, you believe in God, that is fine, and Muhammad, that is all right. You want to go for Hajj and Umrah, you do prayers and you want to give zakah, but you don't give zakah to the government anymore. You do zakah as an individual charity. You want to marry and divorce, custody, and so on. You have something called Mahkama Shari'iyya, the Shari'i court. Full stop. That's it. But economics and architecture and psychology and sciences in general and humanities and philosophy, and this is no longer Islam. This is no longer has anything to do with the Quran. And that history is a baggage. If you would like to develop Islamic studies for today, is a baggage. Why? Because Islamic studies today has a responsibility to contribute. This is not about clash of civilizations or any of that. This is about contributing. We have some good ideas for economics, actually, as Muslims, but we haven't studied economics from an Islamic perspective enough to add to the economic thought of today. We have did what I will talk about now, apologism, so that the capitalist economics, we put on a abaya and we call it Islamic finances and stuff. But it is not a deep revision and deep contribution, to use the right word. It's not a deep contribution to the economic thought of today, the political thought of today, the architectural thought of today, the artistic, the literary thought. We have not produced knowledge based on the Quran for a few centuries, largely. Of course, Prof Al-Kifli talked, for example, about Dr. Naqib Al-Attas, rahimahullah. Of course, that is somebody who produced knowledge based on the Quran. But these are rare cases in our ummah. Those ustad and ulama and so on you can count them. How many genuine scholars who are not just copying, but producing true scholarship. Let me move on. Therefore, when you divide disciplines today, you're talking about these four areas: humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and applied sciences. And as I mentioned, Islam falls under theology here. Islam, if you look at the Quran, does not divide knowledge like that, because the Quran does not deal with disciplines. Why? Because knowledge in the Quran is not tied to the market. Knowledge in the Quran is tied to knowing Allah. And yes, you could, of course, have a skill and go to the market and be a lawyer or doctor, a technician. You can be anything based on a skill. But the ilm, or the learning, the knowledge that the Quran is talking about, is not market-based. And therefore, when you study Islamic studies, you are not going to be an expert in a discipline and know nothing else about it. You have a PhD in microbiology, but you don't know how to eat or drink. You don't know Allah and the history of humanity, and you have no comprehension of the basic knowledge, which is what we see today. Yet I see today people who, students who come and do a PhD with me, and he studied hadith, but his knowledge of the Quran is very weak. He cannot read 3 verses of the Quran, and he has a PhD in hadith, right? He cannot understand the Islamic history and what happened, and doesn't define the Islamic history to start with, because he studies in a silo, and that's the next silo here, which is contemporary Islamic studies. The silo of kalam or fiqh in the jurist sense only, in the court sense, not fiqh in the comprehensive sense. Tafsir, without even the knowledge of the Quran. So you study tafsir, and you're actually studying the history of tafsir, not how you look at the Quran today and how you read the Quran today. Is it different from the past? Yes. There are things that are fixed, obviously, in Islam. You're not going to read the Quran to do prayers or Hajj or Umrah differently, or even to do marriage or divorce or any of these things differently, or any of the things that are fixed in Islam. You're not going to define riba or zina or any of that differently. That's Islam. But you're going to read in the Quran a different tafsir that is a political tafsir. And we need that, because so far we rely on Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Khaldun, Al-Juwayni, Al-Mawardi, the books that were written many centuries ago, to deal with politics today from an Islamic point of view. And therefore, the Islamic groups that are trying to deal with politics are not mature. They don't know what a state is and how policy is made. They memorize Al-Mawardi and Ibn Taymiyyah, and they come and try to rule a modern nation state. And that is a different story. People who do economics today, they still go and study Abu Yusuf and again Ibn Khaldun and so forth, but they don't apply the principles of Islamic economics on economics today. And these principles, they come from tafsir. But if you are imprisoned in Tabari and Ibn Kathir and Zamakhshari and so forth, all the way until today, until Sayyid Qutb and Ibn Ashur. This is fantastic. This is very good study of the interpretation of the Quran. But that is not Quranic studies for today, because Quranic studies for today have to be wider than that, and they have to touch our lives. And then, as I mentioned, when we do contemporary Islamic thought, when we do psychology from an Islamic point of view, or education, or architecture, we usually either imprison ourselves in the silo of history, or we apologize. So the Muslim psychologist is actually Freudian by every measure, but they haven't critiqued Freud enough in order to be a Muslim psychologist. A Muslim sociologist comes from a Durkheimian worldview, or a Rawlsian worldview, or Nietzsche or something. They study, somebody who comes from no Islamic perspective and has nothing to do with the Quranic worldview. And then we try to build a Muslim anthropology that is based on the Orientalist anthropology, that is foundationally not Islamic. And Islamic studies in secular academia is now social studies that are studying Muslims. And this is very good, because we are seeing a lot of Muslim scholars in secular academia who are confessional. They say that they are Muslim. They are not coming from Islam to Islam a la the old Orientalists, Schacht and Goldziher and these people. They are not like that. They are Muslim and they are confessional. They love Islam. But the big question is how? How can I do Islamic studies in secular academia, within secular academia? And what pressure should I put on secular academia so that it allows me to critique some of the economics and not tell me, no, that's the economics department. You cannot do theology with economics. Or no, that's engineering. You cannot talk about social media from an Islamic point of view, because that's communication engineering. Or, oh no, you cannot define the human in a particular way, because no, that's the faculty of psychology or the faculty of medicine. But we have a different definition of the human, and the human body and the human soul and the heart, and what is healthy and what is sick. We have a different definition, but we have to push back a little bit. And I think to push back is to convince academia that we can contribute. Islam could actually bring some very good ideas to modern thought of policy, modern thought of economics, modern thought of arts and entertainment, and so forth. And as you can see, I'm going beyond this fiqhi in the juristic sense, very limited way of looking at Islam, because that is a very political way of looking at Islam. Now, to critique our approaches so far, and that is not every Islamic approach. There are many Islamic approaches that do not fall in any of these areas of critique, but I would like to summarize the critique into those 5 problems. We have imitation, or in Arabic would be taqleed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran has forbidden us from blind imitation. And وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اتَّبِعُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ قَالُوا بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا أَلْفَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. If they are asked to follow what Allah has revealed, which is the Quran we're talking about, they say, no, we will follow what our forefathers did. أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, even if their forefathers do not know and are not guided, and therefore the taqleed, or the imitation, could be in some areas of what we call sha'air or ibadat. I could imitate and to do hajj or umrah, or the basics of Islam I mentioned, but we cannot imitate the rest of Islam. We cannot imitate people in the past, in their politics, in their economics, in their approaches to psychology. This is a different world with different issues. And therefore, taqleed is one of the major problems here, which is imprisoning ourselves in the history of Islamic studies rather than creating new Islamic studies, as people in the past did. The imams of the past were imams because they created new information, new knowledge. Partialism or tajzi' is actually a problem of believing in some of the book and not believing in others, saying that, oh, Islam is about spirituality, as I mentioned, and not about everything else. Or people who think that Islam is only a political system, khilafah and so on, and nothing else. They don't pay attention to what is other than the political system. And therefore, they are just imprisoned in one part of Islam. Or they read the Quran and they don't link the rest of the Quran to it. They take an ayah or half an ayah and they build the world on it. And they consider everything else mansukh or cancelled. I have a book against this whole theory business of cancellation or naskh. They cancel the majority of the Quran because they partialize, they cut the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, كَمَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَى الْمُقْتَسِمِينَ الَّذِينَ جَعَلُوا الْقُرْآنَ عِضِينَ. We have punished the partitioners, those who cut the Quran into organs. You cannot, the Quran is like a human being. You cannot cut it into a nose or a finger, and that's not Quran anymore, right? Partialism. Or we cut the Quran from the Sunnah, or we cut the Sunnah from the Quran. A very popular approach is to go into hadith and hadith from here and there, and without understanding hadith, because hadith is complex. We can talk about that in the discussion, and isolating that from the Quran, and that is partialism. Apologism is a major problem, as I mentioned. It's the same good old riba, but we call it Islamic because we're giving it a Muslim name. It's the same, zina, Allah forbid, but we call it Islamic because we want to promote something different from what Islam is about. It's theft, but we call it Islamic because we give authorities to people to steal certain wealth that they are not allowed to steal, but we give them that authority in the name of some opinion here or there, right? Apologism. When Prophet ﷺ, the companion who converted from Christianity to him, he told him, I give you an advice. Do not imitate something that you used to do in order to match what you used to do before Islam. تضارع ما كنت فيه. تضارع is to match. Do not match a particular view that you have with what Islam is. The Prophet ﷺ advised him, take Islam for what it is. Don't apologize for other worldviews and for other systems and for other rules. Contradiction is also one of the problems. When a group of Muslim scholars came up with a school that is called the Islamization of knowledge, they said that we have to mix al-aqli wa naqli from Ibn Khaldun, that we have to mix the revealed and the rational. But the contradiction here is that the revealed has to be the Quran, not the history of Islamic studies. And the rational has to be from the Quran or based on the Quran, not as in secular. So al-aqli, if al-aqli is going to be secular, and therefore I approach psychology, as I mentioned, in a Freudian way, and sociology in Durkheimian way, and history according to Hegel, and economy according to Marx, then I'm not really, I'm contradicting myself because I'm bringing a worldview that is not the worldview of Islam. And therefore we cannot contradict. I call it sometimes the intellectual schizophrenia of some Muslims. He is in the masjid, he is a Hanafi, and he puts on the kufi, and he insists on the Sha'ira exactly as the madhab of the Hanafi and so on. And at the same time, he's a politician in one of the countries. As a minister, he is an absolutely secular guy, exactly like any minister in France or in Canada here or any of that. Just he has nothing to do with Islam. He prays and makes wudu and does Hajj and Umrah, but when he works in the bank, he actually works in usury. He is making money out of money. And that tanaqud or contradiction. Deconstruction is to follow one of the postmodern streams of deconstruction, whether in the linguistic sense or people who talked about the marginalization of minorities and so forth. And some of these ideas are very important, and some of the questions and critique are very important, but we should not deconstruct the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ if it is proven. We can deconstruct al-fiqh, we can analyze the relationship between power and knowledge, for example, in the writings of al-Shafi'i or Abu Hanifa or al-Qaradawi. That is fine. But we cannot deconstruct the Quran. We cannot go back to the Quran and talk about patriarchy and talk about, no, that is a phase line in Islam, and Islamic studies should not be doing that. Should not critique the word of Allah based on our little theories of patriarchy and hegemony and these kinds of things. Now, this is a humble book that I published recently, and I could make available through IIS for the participants. Inshallah, I'll send a copy to Prof Al-Kifli. Re-envisioning Islamic scholarship, in which these ideas I'm discussing in a few hundred pages. So you will find, if you can mute your mics, please. You will find, inshallah, some details in that book that I can send. But from that book, let me try to offer a few views. In that book of Re-envisioning Islamic scholarship, I tried to propose a way of looking at Islamic studies in a fresh way. And I mentioned 4 circles here. One that is called disciplinary studies that I mentioned, in which we discussed how we can approach today's disciplines, how we can approach today's humanities, natural sciences, social sciences, and applied sciences, and how we can benefit from the wealth of knowledge that disciplines have developed over the past few centuries, but also benefit from the wisdom of Islam. Natural sciences, for example, developed a lot of great achievements and instruments and equations and so forth, systems. But natural sciences, for example, they don't believe that anything is conscious, except the human, perhaps. Some don't even believe that the humans are conscious. They think it's all chemistry. They think it's all neuroscience, and our consciousness is something in our brain. But they don't believe that animals are conscious until today. They don't believe that trees are conscious, or nature or rocks are conscious. The Quran is giving us a different worldview. The Quran is telling us that everything is conscious, and everything has a choice to make some moves and make some decisions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them do's and do nots. And that is a different story. That could resolve some of the bigger questions that we have in natural sciences, at the frontier of natural sciences. You know, the spooky behavior of matter that Einstein talked about could be solved if we believe that matter is alive, and that, yes, maybe this subatomic particle is reacting to the observer because they are conscious. There is something in the subatomic. I'm not saying they are conscious like me, or they have a nervous system, or they have a vision with an eyes in a camera, but they are conscious. When the genetic engineering scholars are fascinated by the behavior of the genetics over generations, we have an explanation of that. Not that the Quran is going to give me a genetic equation or genetic string, but the Quran is telling me that everything is conscious, and that water or any liquid is not its chemistry. Water is not H2O in the Quran. Water is much bigger than that. Water is alive. And therefore, some of the major questions that we have at the frontiers of science, and I'm talking material science, let alone social sciences, where people are much more, inventing stuff from their own minds. But I'm talking about natural sciences. There are certain ideas from the Islamic point of view, such as the life of matter, the consciousness of matter, such as the limitless energy in the universe, such as the ability of consciousnesses to travel more than the speed of light. The Quran is telling us a lot about that. Yes, we haven't had a proof for it so far, but the Quran opens possibilities for us to think about the universe in a different way. from the Hubble telescope, even though the Hubble telescope, again, is a great invention, and the latest one as well with NASA is a fantastic invention. But how can Islam contribute if Muslims approach disciplinary studies in a way that is trying to restructure and rethink? Phenomena studies is what I recommend Islamic studies to move towards, because once you study phenomena, which is the approach of the Quran doesn't do economics. The Quran does poverty and richness and trade and usury, and the Quran deals with phenomena, not with disciplines. And therefore, if you want to take a Quranic approach, that approach has to be not just transdisciplinary, but multidisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. You see, the problem with multidisciplinarity is that disciplinarity thought that each discipline has its epistemology. Excuse my Latin here. Every discipline, they claim, has a different epistemology. And that is not an Islamic idea, because in Islam, the Islamic epistemology is overarching over every source of knowledge and every possibility of knowledge. And therefore, when you study disciplinary studies, you are imprisoned in the silo of the economic epistemology or the political epistemology. And when you study socio-politically, so two disciplines, you are also imprisoned within the epistemology of economics and politics. But if you look at the phenomena, you are beyond economics and politics. You are into every relevant knowledge that is going to deal with the phenomena. You study something like the pandemics, for example. That is not just a health phenomena. That is an economic phenomena. People who died because of the economics, actually, not because of the medicine. The medicine is there. And people who are rich enough, they go to the hospital, and 99% of them are cured from COVID. But the economic question is why we had death. And the political question is why the IP did that with the vaccine and long stories. And the social issues are behind a lot of what happened within the pandemic. So when you study the pandemic as a phenomenon, and you look at all the sides, and the politics and the economics, and even the art that contributed to some of the solution, and the entertainment and the media and the role, and the media is very dangerous and very powerful in today's world, etc. You are studying a phenomenon. And that's why phenomena studies here is where we propose for Islamic studies to move from disciplinary studies to phenomena studies. Usuli studies remains the study of the usul, or the fundamentals. And I don't mean by the usul fiqh, because this is one part of the usul that has to do with, again, courts and so on, or ibadat, or sha'air, or the acts of rituals. This is a very small part of Islam. But I'm talking about the usul as in the fundamental studies of the Quran and Sunnah. And they have to be also an integral part of Islamic studies, and they have to intersect with the other studies. Strategic studies at the bottom here has to do with how to strategize for these studies and how to strategize for the ummah, not the ummah of Muhammad only, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the ummah of humanity. How to strategize. Nobody cares the burden of humanity anymore, and nobody cares the burden of the ummah of Islam. Yes, countries strategize for the country, and companies strategize for the sake of the bottom line of the company. And even Muslim organizations strategize for their objectives. But we need to strategize for the ummah. We need to strategize for the humanity. Where is humanity going with all of this? Very few people are busy with that question. Now, to re-envision Islamic studies, we have to look at the fundamental source of knowledge. I touched on that. We have to look at the fundamental logic. And I propose to you to look at the logic of purposeful connectivity. That is a different logic from the logic of causality. When you look at the Quran as a connected whole, and therefore you look at all the connections between the different concepts and objectives and groups and so on, I'll talk about that. And you look at the purposes of the connectivity. When you look at the universe, not just in silos, don't look at a tree if you are somebody in forestry or environmental studies, don't look at the tree only, look at the group of trees, look at the whole forest and where the water come from, and how the environment is impacting the forest, and how industry is destroying the forest, and what is happening with politics, and what is happening at the societal level. And therefore you study the forest properly with the logic of connectivity. And connectivity has to be tied to purposefulness, because when you look at the forest, what is the purpose of dealing with the forest? If you look at the forest with the purpose of the consumer, therefore the forest for me is just wood, and the animals are for food or perhaps hunting, leisure, and the sea life is another source of food, that is different from the purposes of the creation. When Allah said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, umamun amthalukum, they are nations like you. The trees are nations like us. The fish are nations like us. The Prophet ﷺ, when some of the companions killed some of the wild dogs in Medina, he told them, don't kill the dogs. They are a nation like you. And when they were taking the bird from its chicks, he said that, no, don't traumatize the mother chick with the chick, with her young chicken, because he looked at them in a different way. He looked at the purpose and the connections. He did not look at the chicken as food, and the fish as food, and the tree as wood, and the rock as just, and so forth. Now, fundamental definitions have to come from the Quran in that sense. And what is not defined in the Quran has to be defined by something in the Quran. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. We have not left anything out in the book, which means, as I mentioned, you're not going to find curves of economics or equations of physics in the book, but it tells you how to deal with the curves of economics that talk about money. What is money? What is wealth? And what is property, right? It does not deal with exactly procedures for counseling when it comes to psychology, but it tells you what is sickness and what is health when it comes to a nafs, or the psyche, or the soul. How can you be healthy, and how can you deal with that? That is a very different story from the way, as I mentioned, Freud approached this. Now, we propose this methodology of 5 steps, and to think about steps in terms of methodology is something for training students, really, rather than something that is necessarily for every scholar to think about, because again, all of these steps are interconnected and they are much more complex than putting them in steps, silos like that. How to generate fiqh today? Number 1 is to think about purpose. And purpose is different from problem definition, because you could think of problems that are misdefined. As I mentioned, you have a problem in a society that is called economic freedoms. And who defined the economic freedoms? It's the World Bank and so on. The groups of interest groups are defining your problem. And therefore, I'm looking for economic freedom in the Quran, but the problem is misdefined, because in the economic freedoms that the World Bank is talking about, or the Center of Freedoms in the United States, what's the name? There are some positive issues and some negative issues from an Islamic point of view. And therefore, I cannot start with a problem that is misdefined. Economic freedoms, sexual freedoms. You're writing a thesis from an Islamic point of view, and you are thinking about sexual freedoms. But actually, the Quran doesn't have that concept. The Quran has a dichotomy, marriage and zina. This is the Islamic worldview. People could have a sexual relation if they are a man and a woman who are eligible to marry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Read Surah An-Nisa. It's detailed to the T. Otherwise, it's called fahisha or zina. So that is not a problem in Islam. Patriarchy. There are things in Islam where males have authority because of good reasons, because of responsibilities that they take. For example, in the family. And women have authority too. كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. Prophet Muhammad said, every one of you is a shepherd, and every one of you is responsible for the flock, right? If you are, he said, if you are a husband, you are a shepherd and you are responsible for the flock. And if you are a wife, you are a shepherd and you are responsible for the flock. And if you are, and so forth. So it's not patriarchy versus matriarchy. This is not how we define things from an Islamic point of view. I could agree and disagree with some of the patriarchal proposals. I could agree and disagree with some of what you call economic freedoms or other freedoms, or human rights, or democracy, or whatever you call it, that is not defined by the Quran. I have to agree and disagree with democracy, because democracy is a man-made, human-made invention. And if I approach the lack of democracy as a problem in a society, then I am serving a non-Islamic agenda, because I am not starting by critiquing democracy from an Islamic point of view. And now we can talk about the democracy that is that is desired. How can we have a democracy that does not have the influence of the rich, that does not have the influence of the media, that does not, and so forth, the problems with democracy. But if I just call for democracy, and people in the Arab world sometimes, they die for democracy, but at the end, they don't have the media, the right, free media, that could guarantee the democratic process. And when media is not free, the democratic process is corrupt. That's what we see even here. I live in Canada, south of the border in America. We have a corrupt political process because media is not free. Media is owned by the rich, and now social media is owned by the rich and bought from the rich. Read about the scandal of the latest American election and how Facebook sold basically the profiles of people so that they can target them for election campaigns. That is not democracy anymore. That is ignorance. And we have to define a purpose rather than a problem when we talk about an Islamic approach. So back to this slide of mine the first step here is, what is my purpose from my study? When I study a discipline, what is my purpose? Usually, as I mentioned, disciplines have economic purposes, market purposes. But from an Islamic point of view, and for Muslim scholars, your market purposes should be secondary, the skills that you develop in order to make a living and have a profession, and your knowledge purpose should be the first step. Now, you go next to the Quran and the Sunnah in what we call cycles of reflection. Cycles of reflection is beyond the specialization of tafsir or hadith. We are not reading this book enough, including scholars of Islam, and we have a major problem with the Arabic language. People who speak Arabic are not interested in the language of Islam, and their kids no longer speak proper Arabic. And there is a crisis of the Arabic language. I am speaking to you ironically in English. I would have loved to speak in Arabic because that is the language of Islam. I would have then made it a much easier lecture to give because I have the terms from the language of Islam. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that we don't read the Quran, because even if you don't read Arabic, you could still read the Quran in a translation in your language, whatever the language is. It's an interpretation. It's not exactly the word of Allah, but it has the meanings of the Quran. And therefore, it will free your mind from being imprisoned by an ideology that is not Islamic, by basically clergyhood. We don't have clergy in Islam. We don't have a pope or a church or the hierarchy. And the clergy is not between us and Allah. Every Muslim could speak to Allah, and every Muslim could speak about knowledge. Of course, knowledge that they know, that they understand. They cannot speak about knowledge that they have no knowledge of. They have to be knowledgeable about what they speak. And they have to give fatwa, not in marriage and divorce, if they are not specialized in that, but maybe he or she is specialized in economics. And therefore, they give us fatwa in economics because they understand economics better than I do. And I studied law. And therefore, I cannot really understand economics as much as you. Or you studied psychology, or you studied military sciences, or you studied architecture or arts or cinema. Therefore, you give us fatwas about these things because you understand your area. And when you read the Quran, you are able to produce knowledge. We have not been producing knowledge according to the Quran for centuries. And this is not right. And this is not the religion of Islam, that we make a privilege for people who studied law to become clergy, because that's not Islam anymore. They can be clergy in the matters of law, but we need clergy, as I mentioned, in the matters of architecture and psychology and politics and arts. Thirdly, when you read the Quran and you link it with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as I mentioned, the hadith is a very long story and complex. I don't advise my brothers and sisters who can hear me here to quote any hadith unless you understand what you're talking about, because the hadith is a narration. Yes, it could be authentic. It could be to the best of the narrator's memory. That is what the Prophet said. But when did the Prophet say this, and how, and where, and in what context, and what happened during that day? That is not mentioned. You cannot quote 4 or 5 words and make a rule because this is a hadith. This is not right. This is not scholarship. But you can do that with the Quran. Why? Because the rest of the Quran is known. If you tell us, لا تقربوا الصلاة, do not come close to the prayers, we'll tell you, no, read the rest of the ayah. It says, لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. Do not come close to the prayers if you are drunk. Yeah, then the rest of the Quran is there. But in the hadith, we don't have that. And many of the scholars of hadith had cut the hadith into fragments and therefore created a major problem. That's a different lecture I could give. But I'm just saying that to build that, read the Quran and read the hadith, but with care and without contradicting the Quran. Now, what are you looking for when you read the Quran? You're looking for objectives, which are the maqasid. What are the objectives? Is basically the goals, the purposes, the why, the answering of the question of why. Why am I studying this phenomena? In order to make the world a better world. Now, how can I do that? Now we get from the objectives to the concepts. Then how do you define the world? How do you define good and evil and beauty and ugliness? And as I mentioned, marriage and adultery and theft and honesty. How do you define what is khair, what is good in any sense? These are concepts. And the Quran is full of concepts. They have a big the surahs have a big network of concepts that are all interconnected and that are connected to the objectives. Now, the groups are according to the concepts. Al-Iman, and therefore Al-Mu'minun. Al-Ulama, from Al-Ilm. Ilm is knowledge, and therefore ulama cannot be different from how the Quran defined ilm. Fuqaha cannot be different from how the Quran defined fiqh. Tujjar, people who are traders, cannot be different from how the Quran defined tijara. Tijara in the Quran is not just goods for money. People could do tijara with their souls or their deen or the signs of Allah. The tijara is any exchange. That is the Quran. And therefore, you cannot define trade without understanding the Quranic philosophy of trade, which is literally trade, an exchange of something for something. And that exchange, is it fair? Is it balanced? Does it have more than it is riba? Does it have less than it is bakhs? And both are haram. And how can we, and so forth. Values, the values of beauty, the values of morality, the values of benefits and harms, and so forth, the commands, the do's and the don'ts, how to integrate this worldview. The proofs is the logic that the Quran uses in order to make an argument. How does the Quran use that? When you think about it, what is the argument that the Quran is making for the health of the human being, for example, so that in your medical thought that you are trying to develop, you read the Quran in the right way. Now, critical studies of literature and reality comes after that, comes after you build a worldview from the Quran, and you have to look at 2 directions with critique. We have to critique ourselves as Islamic scholarship. There is nothing wrong about critiquing ourselves, or critiquing any of the imams, or critiquing any of the scholars, past or present, or any of the Sahaba even, past, like in the past of the Prophet ﷺ. This is critique of thought. But we cannot critique Muhammad or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are two. Yeah, if you are a believer, you don't critique Allah. You don't say, oh, Allah is patriarchal or Muhammad is violent or anything like that. Then you don't understand what Muhammad is about, and you don't understand what Allah is about. You're not a true believer. Go and check your belief and check your information. But otherwise, we have to critique Islamic scholarship from the companions all the way until today. Do we know as much as they did in the past? No, we actually know more than what they did in the past. And we can see and hear more hadith than they heard from the past. And we understand the reality of physics and nature more than what they understood in the past. And therefore, yes, we can have better opinions than the opinions they had in the past. Now, we also have to critique non-Islamic scholarship. We cannot take the non-Islamic scholarship for granted. And as I mentioned, there is a lot of achievement that appeared in every science and every discipline, but we have to be critical. And between the two frameworks, the framework of the revelational values, proofs, commands, concepts, objectives, parties, universal laws, and the framework of the human-made universal laws, the laws that humanity thinks that govern everything, versus the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in the Quran as governance of everything. And therefore, we come up with formative theories and principles. There is a growing movement of that. There is growing movement of coming up with Quranic holistic patterns that could contribute to knowledge of today in the areas of, as I mentioned, policy and architecture and so forth. There are beautiful research done about, for example, the role of water in contemporary architecture, for example, done by Muslims. The impact of the social coherence on civil society, for example, when you talk about sociology or talking about political science and so forth. Reasoning in that sense is not induction, but is what we call emergence. So when you read the Quran and you're starting to become a faqih in your area of discipline, I'm not asking you again to give fatwas on matters of Hajj or Umrah or marriage of divorce, but I'm asking you to start to give fatwas in matters of economics or psychology. You become a faqih in psychology, and we need that. And therefore, it will emerge that you start to formalize theories and principles and frameworks by which you could deal with psychology today. The emergence will be based on the connectivity and objectives, as I mentioned, based on the logic of objective connectivity. And therefore, we could start to realize Islamic scholarship in three areas: research, education, and action. And these are the three areas that Islam always thrives in. Islam doesn't know research without education about the research, and doesn't know education without action and the realization of that. And then we can start to build these networks of researchers. These are ideas about Islamic scholarship that I thought would perhaps give some food for thought about that. It is not possible to move forward with Islam as an Islamic ummah with our main objective is to be witnesses over humankind without going back and reviving our Islamic scholarship, because Islamic scholarship has something to contribute, but Muslims have to be able to take the responsibility. They cannot take the responsibility by asking people who are trained in the rituals to give the fatwas about medical issues and economic issues and architectural issues that they have nothing to do with. And it is not enough. And my brother, Prof Al-Kifli, mentioned I'm a member of a few fiqh councils. It's not enough to bring us a doctor who gives us 20 minutes about transplantation, and then you ask me to give a fatwa about transplantation, but I don't know that. It's very complex, or genetics, or any of these things, or Bitcoin, or any of that. And then I'm asked to give a fatwa about Bitcoin, and it's very complex. When I went, and I have a little bit of science background, as my brother mentioned, when I went and looked at the equations, they are really complex. And no, I cannot give fatwas about that. And I cannot give a fatwa without understanding the politics of the Bitcoins and the digital currency, because the politics of the digital currency is complex. Some of it has to do with standing against the current political hegemony, which I support. Some of it has to do with financing illegal activities, which I would be against. But it depends on what you are talking about. Islamic scholarship is invited to widen the scope. Islamic studies is invited to be multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, to be phenomena-based. And I'm inviting you to discuss these ideas. Well, again, I am really, as I mentioned in the beginning of the lecture, for those who came late, I'm honored to be speaking at the University of the Philippines. It's the first time I speak in any actually Philippines context, and I'm looking forward to visiting and inshallah perhaps seeing all of you in a live session, having good discussions and seminars. Thank you very much again for inviting me. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you so much, Dr. Auda, for that very enlightening lecture. Professor Wadi, would you like to say something before we'll proceed with the Q&A?
You're muted, Prof.
Thank you, Professor Auda. Indeed, that was very comprehensive and enlightening. And you mentioned earlier that you are seeing some kind of a parallel trajectories of your engagement in ours. And we are very happy of that recognition and your willingness even to visit us here in the Philippines. And in this connection, we are very grateful, not only of your presentation today, but even our future engagement. I just want to mention additional input into why we are quite happy and look at with better prospects of our engagement. The new building of the Institute of Islamic Studies is currently under construction.
MashaAllah.
And indeed, I think your thoughts, your philosophy, your methodology is something that is very, very important in providing a new vision, a new mission, a new methodology of Islamic studies in the Philippines. We were told that possibly by next year, maybe mid next year, the building will be available and we could transfer to that new building. We are actually at present engaged in the preparation in our curriculum development, appraisals, our engagement with the networks and linkages with other universities, including enriching our publications, developing our websites, inviting new faculty members and lecturers, broadening our research plans and programs. So therefore, your presence, Dr. Auda, is very much appreciated. That's why I mentioned earlier that this is just our first engagement. I think your thought resonates very strongly with what we feel here at the University of the Philippines. Having said that, as we followed your engagement, including your writings, personally, I thought that you must have influenced some universities or institutions in other countries. What had been what are the response into this engagement, particularly your proposal in terms of enlivening, broadening Islamic studies beyond the traditional understanding of ilm and so on? What has been the response of these universities? And if there were already positive responses, what are the developments and trajectories so far of this engagement? I think that I would first stick into that question. Professor Auda, then our friends in this webinar and other participants could also come in and raise their questions. Thank you.
Barakallahu feekum. Well, it's my honor and pleasure. Inshallah, we can arrange for that visit. I would be honored, inshallah. About the response, I tried so far to take a strategy of working with students and professors and universities and research centers rather than working with the media. I'm not even on social media, as you might have noticed, because this proposal for serious and contemporary and Quranic Islamic studies is not a media call. It's not really. It's for people who would like to produce thought. And of course, media could be very useful. We're talking now. We might put the lecture out for those who would like to look at it, but it is not about using it for political reasons, which is what usually mainstream media is about. From traditional circles of scholarship, so far the response is ignoring that message, and that is good so far because some people feel territorial. Some people do not like that I speak about fiqh in a way that widens fiqh. You mentioned I'm one of the founders of the International Union for Muslim Scholars. And it's a discussion that we had recently, even on the board, about the definition of scholars, International Union for Muslim Scholars. When I participated personally in the founding of this organization, it was not just about fuqaha in the Sharia sense, but about a scholar of Islam in psychology, in economics, in arts, but a scholar of Islam. And many of our traditional scholars do not like this idea because they would like to monopolize the definition of scholarship. And there's a lot of politics behind this, and there's a lot of issues. But some of the, what you could call traditional scholars, are actually welcoming to these ideas. And many of them I participated with in seminars and so forth in different parts of the world. I have been so far to almost, 60 countries and more. And in every country, there are people who are from the traditional scholarship who would like to expand the horizon. So that's the traditional circles. The secular circles, I spoke everywhere, but I still do not have the ability to influence the curricula. But I know that these humble books of mine are everywhere in every level, alhamdulillah, and so forth, and people who I consider to be colleagues or students. But we haven't been able to make an impact because usually the curriculum is based, as I mentioned, on the market. And this kind of thought is considered theology, you see, is not usually welcome. The countries have been different in terms of accepting this kind of approach. I'm talking like, let's say, European countries. I noticed that in Germany, for example, there is more welcoming of theologians speaking about Islam. I spoke in every Islamic studies department in Germany, and I gave lectures in Arabic and English. And I didn't see much sensitivity from what I have to say, because they would like to also hear the theological voice. But I spoke, for example, one of those times in Princeton University in the US, in a policy department. And I felt that, I was not exactly welcome. You speak in policy and you talk in religion. What is that? You see, I spoke once in Yale Faculty of Law, and I had quite a debate with one of the professors, because he teaches that law has nothing to do with morality. In fact, he told me, I teach that law has nothing to do with justice. And justice, he told me, a professor at Yale University Faculty of Law, he told me, but justice doesn't have any objective reality. I told him, you're right. I believe in justice because I'm Muslim. Justice is one of the names of God. And he told me, well, but that's a theological approach. I told him, I don't know if the theological approach is better or the positive approach. At the end, law is for the betterment of the society. And I believe, so we got into that discussion. So what I'm saying is that, yes, there is positive response, but those who understand that Islam is trying to contribute here, we're trying to bring Islam to the level of contribution, sometimes they hesitate. And sometimes, depending on how Islamophobic they are or open-minded they are, they sometimes, people welcome when we talk about something that will eventually cause development or higher education and so forth. And alhamdulillah, I've contributed to many programs in different parts of the world. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you, Dr. Auda. Maybe other friends, participants are also interested to raise some questions. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We have a question from Sol Hidalgo. And may I read for Dr. Auda? May I ask the professor if he is informed about system thinking or systems analysis? I find that it may be, if guided by usul, can be a good tool for Islamic study.
For usul al-fiqh, you mean?
I think so, sir.
Well, yeah, usul al-fiqh is a special case of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a method of creating Islamic scholarship in the contemporary sense. Usul al-fiqh, yes, maqasid al-sharia could be a tool for developing it, but that is only for the law, fiqh in the law sense, for the courts or for the rituals, but not fiqh, as I mentioned, in the sciences and phenomena sense. That usul al-fiqh cannot do that. Usul al-fiqh doesn't have the tool, as in Quran and Sunnah, ijma', qiyas, istislah, istishab, istihsan. No, that is not methodology. That doesn't allow you to do research on today's phenomena like global warming, for example, or poverty, or genetic engineering. You really cannot study genetics through al-qiyas, wal-istislah, wal-istishab, wal-istihsan, because these are by definition legal tools for the law, not for the thought that is required to approach science, for example, philosophy of science. That is not usul al-fiqh.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, sir, from actually one of our students. He is also a Sharia counselor, and he's asking, if Arabic language is the language of Islam, can there be sufficient and genuine understanding about Islam without learning or fluency in the Arabic language?
Yes, you could have sufficiency about Islam and you don't know Arabic, because you need the conceptual framework. You are not going to be a scholar of what I called usul in my lecture. Usul as in the fundamentals. You're not a scholar of the Quran or the Hadith, but you could be a scholar of economics and you don't know Arabic, because you understand the economic system in the Quran, which you read in English or Filipino or any language, and then you understood the definition of money and the movement of the markets and the role of zakah and awqaf, the endowments, the economic system. I'm speaking about these things. You don't have to know Arabic to understand the endowments, for example, the awqaf, and the role in the economics, or to do counseling for marriage or for psychological issues, for example. You don't have to know Arabic, but you have to know Islam and you have to know Quran so that you understand the human being in a better way. And therefore you do counseling. You don't have to know Arabic to come to sports, let's say, from an Islamic point of view. But you study the Quran with your sports eyes in your language. But you really cannot claim to be a scholar of Quran or Sunnah without knowing Arabic. Those who claim to be scholars of Islam and they don't know the language of Islam, as in usul, as in fundamentals of Islam, that's not possible. It's not possible. And you can learn.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Our former dean wants to ask some questions to you.
MashaAllah.
Professor Morados, Macrina Morados.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Dean.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Jasser. It's nice to see you again. I participated the Karama training in 2018, and you were one of the
MashaAllah, in Washington.
lecturers in Washington.
Nice meeting you again.
Yeah. I have this question, Doctor. In actual practice, we have like a problem when it comes to framing framework for research on topics such as gender equality, feminism, and then this new trend of, the LGBTQ, no? And if we want to, as practitioner in as a Sharia counselor, for example, and also as a faculty member of the institute, we have this dilemma of like, what kind of approach and framework we can safely use, because there is also this issue that sometimes the Maqasid al-Sharia would be used. It can be prone to abuse, like to something that is really un-Islamic, something like that. So can you share to us your thought about this, and a tip where we can safely use some principles that we can use in our research on that I have mentioned?
Barakallahu feekum. Well, nice to meet you again,
Dr. Jasser.
Barakallahu feekum, Doctora. Barakallahu feekum.
Over to you.
Allah yahfazkum. Regarding the issues of gender equality, feminism, LGBTQ plus all of that, no, we have to take an Islamic perspective. We cannot allow others to define the problem for us. As a Muslim researcher, when you research gender equality, what do you mean exactly by gender? Because in Islam, there is a definition. Again, you don't have to know Arabic, but if you read the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He created humans in male and female. Allah created us in male and female. Everyone on earth is either male or female. Gender is not socially defined. The social definition of gender is a secular idea. The Islamic idea is not that. And gender doesn't have freedom in Islam. You cannot choose your gender. Yes, but they will say, oh, some people are mixed and so on. No, nobody is mixed. Whoever is mixed physically is going to be either closer to the male or closer to the female. But the LGBT question is not about mixed gender. It's not about what we call in Islam or in Arabic khuntha. It's not about that. It's psychology. It's somebody who does not want to be in their skin, in their nature. He is a man, but he doesn't want to be a man. She's a woman, but she doesn't want to be a woman. And that in Islam is a psychological problem that requires therapy. And I'm not saying to discriminate against body or to be violent or to put them in prison. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the Islamic worldview. The Islamic worldview is that people are created naturally, either male or female. And if he is a male and he thinks he should be a female, that is, in Islamic psychology, is a problem that would require treatment or therapy, so that that person is going to have to go back to who they are anyway. And if they mess up who they are, Allah forbid, we see this a lot here. Many of these people convert to Islam, by the way. In North America here, we see it as a phenomenon, it's a rising phenomenon. And after they convert to Islam, they don't know what to do. They already did operations, and they're already now a different person, different gender, because he changed himself into a female, and he was a male. And in Islam, it becomes more complex because you want to bring them back to who they are. But basically, it depends on the objective. What is the objective of these studies? The objective, as I see in Western civilization, is to destroy Western civilization. Western civilization, I live here in Toronto, one of the biggest Western cities. Western civilization is destroying itself. That's how I see it. And that's not just Muslims saying that. Many people from other faiths or no faith say the same thing, because civilizations have to be based on the traditional definition of humanity as male and female. And I really respect the countries that are trying to take policies that go against that tide. So we have to approach that from an Islamic perspective. We have something in Islam, as I mentioned in the lecture, that is called marriage, and something that's called zina, zawaj and zina, marriage and adultery, or fahisha, ugly deeds. So we have to call a spade, as we say in English. And therefore we call the deviations zina. That is coming from an Islamic perspective. That's who we are. And if you don't call it zina, Islam will go on, and you are not an authentic scholar. I was invited a few years back to the city of London in the UK, when I used to live in the UK, to give a talk on that. And I had a big debate with others on that, Islam, why doesn't the Quran develop? Religions are all accommodating the sexual rights. Why don't Islam? I told them, if I give you the answer that you're looking for, then I'm not a Muslim scholar. Islam will go on. Islam is Islam. Islam is not going to change. Islam is the Quran. And that book is memorized by hundreds of millions of people. And therefore, we cannot really change it. Islam will go on. And if I tell you that what we call in Islam adultery is allowed, then I'm not a scholar. And Islam will move on anyway. So my point is to be tough a little bit in that, in terms of scholarship. Or if you feel obliged, do not go there. Like if you are going to break the law and so on, then avoid that topic. As a student, as a speaker, as a scholar, we also have to be smart. You have to deal with the reality, and we cannot subject ourselves to danger. Sometimes there are certain laws that until they change, but we should not be mild about that. And I don't agree with other brothers and sisters in the Islamic scholarship, especially in the West, who are, in the gray zone about that, or they quote history, or no, I don't think that this is right. I think that Islam will continue, and they discredit themselves as scholars by taking a very light stance on this. It's an issue that's black and white in Islam. Well, you mentioned feminism. That's a different story, because Islam is feminist in some ways and is not feminist in other ways. You see, if you mean by feminism women's rights to work and to fight in the war and to be in the mosque, well, Islam is all about that. But if you mean by feminism, you cancel the differences between the husbands and wives in the family, and for the egalitarian approach to family, no, that is not the Islamic system, because Islam has a social system that is based on the difference between males and females, and that system is balanced by giving responsibilities and obligations in balance. If there is an imbalance, then we can start to balance back. You know, if men ask for the rights, but they don't take the responsibilities, then we should force them to do their responsibilities, not to, you know, imbalance what Islam is about. Allah alam, for a short answer. Jazakumullah khair. I'll try to be
Thank you,
short.
Dr. Auda. Before I'll call those who raise their hands, there is another question from our student. He says, Assalamu alaikum, Prof Auda. I just want to know, how do you view fiqh and scholars of Islamic studies in Southeast Asia vis-a-vis in European countries? Are there gaps and similarities?
I didn't get the question. I'm sorry. How?
He said, I just want to know, how do you view fiqh and scholars of Islamic studies in Southeast Asia vis-a-vis in European countries? Are there gaps and similarities?
Southeast Asia versus what countries?
European countries.
Oh, European countries. Well, no, Islam, there is a fixed part of Islam that everywhere is the same. And there is a variable part that Muslims develop based on the society. You live in a society, it has different customs and different politics and different economics and different ways of doing things. So fiqh is different between every city, not just every country. Islam doesn't go by countries, by the way. Countries are just political administration. 100 years from now, we might not have any of these countries. So Islam doesn't go by these countries or continents or like those frameworks that we have. But wherever you are, there is a region, and that region, wherever you are in the world, has a background of food and currencies and family ties and customs, and that impacts fiqh. So I hope this answers the question, inshallah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Auda. We have several participants who are raising their hands.
Please ask them to participate.
Yeah. I'd like to call first Bibi Jan MD Ayub.
Okay,
You may
thank
please
you.
introduce yourself briefly and then.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Brother Darwin. And I'm sorry, and Jazakallah khair for Professor Auda for the very insightful, enriching, and refreshing sharing. Alhamdulillah, you and your team have developed this revisioning process, which to me is very timely and very, very sensible, because I'm an educator from Singapore. I've been working as a counselor and teacher for 43 years. And I find that our community, our ummah, is very much need this kind of clarity, because we are living in this VUCA world where a lot of complexity and ambiguity. So I think having a simple framework that is useful for laymen, like people like me, will be very, very helpful. So my question is, how do we operationalize this great idea of yours? You know, because to me, I think we need a critical mass of scholars. Definitely, I think the fact that you have gone to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and other parts of the world to share your vision, coming up with the books, these are all wonderful. But having the, if we can develop curriculum and introduce this in universities modules, and at the same time getting people at the ground level, practitioners who can come up with research. So my question is, how do we actually set up this kind of team or network that can, we can have top down, we can have bottom up, ground up initiative that will be able to help you in your idea of operationalizing this vision process. Wallahu alam. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Nice meeting you, my sister. The question of how is a very important question. We have to strategize first. We have to think about how ideas of renewal of Islamic thought, not just my humble ideas, but there is a whole stream of renewal in Islam, alhamdulillah, that is there. Many people are trying to bring new ideas and new methods and new approaches. Now, we have to strategize. We have to look for individuals who are willing to be ambassadors for this kind of thought. And in the Maqasid Institute, we are more than happy to participate with those individuals. And we have to look for institutions who are willing to introduce these kinds of ideas to their students or their researchers, so that in their dynamics, they start to change some of the research into productive research in that sense, in the Maqasid methodology sense that we're talking about. How we have to work on obviously different levels, from the time ideas are created to the time they are reality on the ground. There is the research side that will require a lot of efforts. There is the educational side that has to do with the translation of research into curricula. And there is the action side that has to do with the translation of the education and research into initiatives on the ground. That road is going to be challenged by, as I mentioned, a number of political and economic interests that might not agree with the renewal of Islam, that might love to see Islam only in its traditional form, or to see Islam in a way that is very much not Islam. And we need to strategize about how to deal with these forces that do not like Islam to be at par with the world's problems. So there is a lot of ideas, and if there is any initiative, I left my email in the chat. Please feel free to email me. More than happy to, inshallah, correspond to any of you for any particular suggestions. I leave my email on the Maqasid Institute. It will come to me, inshallah, and we can discuss.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. I'll definitely will take that offer that you are giving. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Welcome, inshallah.
Okay, thank you. We have another participant raising. Actually, there are many of them, but I'd like to start with another one. Safa Manala.
Yes, hello.
You may take
Assalamu
your
alaikum.
question.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning. And thank you very much for this very insightful talk, Dr. Jasser. I really learned a lot. My question is about, I want to begin by explaining the situation that I have in my university. So we are a state university in Mindanao, and we are thinking about introducing a course on Islamic business administration. So when I say business administration, included there would be Islamic finance, Islamic economics, Islamic marketing, and so on. So it's a master's program. The problem that we have right now is that majority of the faculty in the College of Business are Christian, and they have very limited knowledge on Islam. Much so how Islam applies in the business, or the business and the finance world. And I am the only Muslim faculty. So, but because this is a directive from the top administration of the university that we are to introduce a master's program on Islamic business administration, my concern and worry is that, and I really want to get your opinion on this, would it be right for non-Muslims to craft and develop the curriculum on Islamic business administration, especially because they also have very limited knowledge on Islam in general as a religion and how Islam applies to business? And if so, if you think that that would not be the right way to go about it, would you suggest that we first have to equip ourselves by maybe sending them out to study Islam before they can come back and craft this curriculum? Or what do you suggest we should do? Thank you.
Allah bless you. Well, that is quite a challenge, because it depends on what you mean by Islamic business administration. If you mean business administration of Muslims, that is different from business administration in Islam. If you mean business administration of Muslims, then it's a social study. Then we are studying the usual business administration in the secular curriculum, the secular way, but we're applying it to Islamic organizations or Islamic societies or companies that sell Islamic products or halal or something. But if you mean to take an Islamic approach to business administration, no, that does not require just a Muslim. That requires somebody who has an Islamic approach. And most Muslims don't have an Islamic approach. Most Muslims have the business administration approach that they studied in secular academia. I think that the right steps is to start to develop research rather than curriculum. And then as the research starts to bring research products, then we can teach that. So let's say we will have a seminar or we have a research group to develop what is Islamic business administration. What does it mean? How different it is from the mainstream, from the textbook that we already have. So what are the commentary, at least on the margins of that textbook from an Islamic point of view? We have to do this research first, and then we can say that we apply Islam to business administration. There are books out there and research. Many of them are apologetic, as I mentioned. Many of them are not really genuinely Islamic. They are just apologizing for the status quo. But I am sure you will find some of them that are more genuine, that bring Islamic ideas that are new to business administration. But I think that research has to precede that. It's not about Muslim or non-Muslim. It's about an Islamic approach. If there is a non-Muslim who believes in the Islamic approach, reads the Quran, and looks for a framework for business in the Quran, they might be able to produce some thought. But I think that it requires you to believe in the message of the Quran in order to produce that kind of knowledge. I would be very surprised if a non-Muslim does that. I hope this answers the question. But again, I left my email, and I even left a copy of that book I told you about on the chat here for people who would like to take it. You can download it from here. And perhaps then we can continue to talk, inshallah. I'm more than happy to discuss any particular project that you would like to send me, and we can discuss, or I can refer you to one of our scholars who could, inshallah, help you, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Auda. You are very generous in sharing your wisdom and resources. And our next participant who wants to ask, Aya Nimatullah.
Nimatullah. Jazakumullah khair.
Jimeno.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum
Hi,
assalam.
Assalamualaikum. Just
It's okay. He can go first, I think. Go ahead.
hello, good morning. Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Okay.
My question actually is not only for the good professor. It's a question for the whole institution. I'm actually planning to pursue higher studies at UPIIS. It's about a question of our major. I'm actually here at the University of Santo Tomas, the Catholic University of the Philippines. In here, Islamic studies or Islamic philosophy is not that discussed. Sometimes it in passing, but is it already time for us to recognize Islamic Philippine philosophy or Philippine Islamic philosophy?
Philippine Islamic philosophy?
Yes, Doc. Yes, Professor.
What do you mean by that?
The recognition, or establishing or taking a foothold to make Islamic philosophy somewhat recognized in the academe or as a discipline.
Sure. But as I mentioned, there is a difference between Islamic philosophy and the history of Islamic philosophy. So I think it's important to produce philosophy for today that addresses the philosophical questions of today, not the philosophical questions of the past. So yes, it's a great idea, and philosophy is a fantastic discipline. despite the fact, the critique of disciplines that I mentioned. But anyway, our universities, so far, most of them go by disciplines. So it is good that we develop Islamic philosophy in a university, but let us ask contemporary questions. Let us, you see, the kalam or the philosophy of the past talked about the issues that the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya and all of that, they debated at-ta'til wa-tajbih wa-tajsim. They debated the issues of the past. Today, we need to debate issues of atheism, Darwinism, secularism, positivism, philosophy of law, axiology today. So I totally agree with you, but I advise that you seek contemporary questions to answer from an Islamic point of view, through the Quran and through your background of Islamic history and Islamic philosophy, but for today, because we need philosophical debates for today from an Islamic point of view. Inshallah, jazakallah.
Shukran. I'm actually planning to work on polygamy and also the thoughts of Averroes. I'm developing a paper on that, and I'm actually presenting it to the faculty. And they are actually thrilled to learn more about the history of Islam and also Islam itself, Islam person.
MashaAllah, the philosophy of polygamy. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to read that when you develop something. I would like to read it, inshallah.
MashaAllah, inshallah. Shukran.
Barakallahu feekum.
Thank you, Ayan. And let's get back to Ma'am Aya, Nimatullah.
Yes, Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum, Professor Auda. I'm really privileged to have this opportunity to attend your lecture. I'm actually speaking from Toronto, Canada. And I'm really excited to have found you here. MashaAllah, tabarakallah.
Okay.
That's great. I find this lecture to be really timely, like the other sister was mentioning. I come from an audit background. I worked in a corporate structure, and then I left it, and I'm pursuing my master's right now in counseling psychology. And it's of course in a secular university, and because I come from a totally different realm, I was shocked with certain principles that they're trying to instill so hard in our minds, in our brains and hearts, that I'm rejecting, like with my own fitra, I'm really rejecting. So I was with my baby steps, to be honest, because not everything is marketed well out there. So I don't have the resources. I was trying to find Islamic resources, Islamic psychology basis, so that one day, inshallah, when I'm eligible, I can have this faith-based counseling. But I really appreciate your message at looking at the macro lens as defined in the Quran and based in the Islamic principles. And I highly resonate with that. From a practical point of view, a pragmatic point of view, can you recommend a starting point, if I may, a shortcut where I can find the Quranic principles to study it? Because I'm Arabic, I'm Egyptian. So I have Arabic and I have English. And I would really love to use this to the privilege of Islam and to the privilege and benefit of my clients, inshallah, one day. So if there is something that I can study, or a surah that I can start with, for example, I would really appreciate that.
Barakallahu feekum. Well, ahlan wa sahlan. Actually, the maqasid.org, I put the address on the chat group. Please refer to that. We offer MOOCs. We offer a training for those who would like to be trained in methodology. At the end of the training, we have a research paper that you write on your area or your phenomena that you're studying. In your case, will be counseling. And then after that, we have another program where we read the Quran, or we make you read the Quran, and we come back and discuss your reading in a group of research over 7 months. but after the MOOC, after the graduate course that we offer. So please visit maqasid.org. We have a cycle coming up for the graduate course that I would be teaching. It's mostly electronic, but we have some live sessions. Take that course. That's step number one. Step number two, get with us into the reflection on the Quran program, which is inshallah coming up in a few months. Then we can take it from there. You will be doing the research and the work, but in the Maqasid Institute, we'll be trying to guide that journey, with the methodology. And I put on the chat the book as well. If you can read the book, I'm more than happy to discuss that. I can put it in Arabic as well.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Barakallahu feekum. Barakallahu feekum.
Okay, our next questioner, participant who wants to question, I call Baimot Lakman.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Dr. Jasser, and thank you very much for that wonderful and very informative lecture. I'm so privileged to be able to hear you talking about all this important information. So I heard that you are very knowledgeable about Quran, subhanAllah, and my question is related to the recent law that we had here in the Philippines. It was enacted actually this year, but it was signed last year, and the law was Republic Act 11596, or known as a criminalizing early child marriage. So I would like to hear, in your opinion, is it okay to criminalize early child marriage, and how do you think that our Muslim legislators here in the Philippines to address this issue? Because in our Muslim society, although the law already enacted in entire Philippines except in the southern part, where you will find most of the Muslims, okay, so they rejected the law, or we can say half of them divided. They have different opinion about the criminalizing early child marriage. So how do you think our Muslim legislator react to this kind of law? And what about the Muslims? How do you think they need to approach the law as well? Thank you very much for your answer.
I have a question for you. How do they define a child in that law? I'm not aware of the law or the debate.
Okay. All right. So according to the law, anyone who is below 18 are not allowed to get married. Yeah.
Well, my view is that child marriage is not allowed in Islam, but a child in Islam is not 18. A child is a bit lower than that. I cannot give a particular age, because I believe that this is relative to people. Some people still are children at the age of 9 and 10, and then they become adults. And some people are children at the age of 13 or 14 or 15. And no, it is not based on the menses for the girls, and I don't know, the green mustache for the dreams for the boys. It's not about that. It's a process. I believe that becoming an adult from being a child is a process. But I also believe that policy has to have a cut line. There has to be a particular age. We have to say, if you ask me, I would say 16 or 15 or something of that sort. 16 is a I don't know, depending on the countries and the culture and so many things. Let's say that 15, below that, we will consider a child as a policy, despite the fact that this is a very relative assessment based on the individual, because there are people who are 16 or 17, and they're still children from the Islamic point of view. And again, it's not just the physical, but also the mental to judge that there is a child. So I believe that this 15, let's say, could be a cutoff point in a policy that is reasonable from an Islamic point of view. That will take us to a very long topic that I could give another 3-hour lecture on, but I will touch on very quickly, which is the Hadith al-Bukhari about Aisha radiallahu anha, that she married the Prophet ﷺ at the age of 6, or 9 or 7 and different narrations and all of that. And I believe that these ahadith are not accurate, and that Aisha radiallahu anha married the Prophet ﷺ at the age at least of 17, probably more of the 18 or 19. And that is not because of your law of child marriage or here the law in Canada or any of that. It's because she was al-Mu'mineen, and the mothers of the believers are not children. Our mothers of the believers are not 6 or 9. The hadith of 6 and 9, long story, are all to me related to Hisham ibn Urwa, ibn Zubayr, one of the narrators. And that narrator is authentic, but in his old age, he had dementia that many of the scholars critiqued. And I believe that this hadith is one of the hadith that he said when he had dementia, because they contradict with many other hadith in Bukhari as well as in other collections. It's a long story. I wrote about that briefly in a book of mine that is called Reclaiming the Mosque, the Role of Women in Islam's House of Worship. I could also put it on the chat for you. I wrote about that in Arabic. If you're interested, a longer thing, I could refer you to a couple other books. But the Prophet ﷺ did not marry a child. And yes, Arabs used to marry children of their cousins or whatever. But first of all, not Muhammad, and not what is considered a child, somebody who is like young. Back to the beginning of my answer, this is relative. This depends on the place and time and the environment. I believe that policy has to have a cutoff line. I think 18 in every culture. I live in the Western culture here. I'm speaking to you from Toronto in Canada. I think 18 in Canada is too high, because most Canadian kids by the age of 18, they already had relationships. And yes, I know that relationships are different from marriage, but I think 18 is too much. I think somebody could marry at the age of 16 or 17 if they wish, and they are capable, and they could be fine. That is why in the law here we have something, and in the States, they call it emancipation. As a child, you could go to an American judge and ask to be emancipated. So sometimes in the East, we copy from the laws of the West without fiqh, without understanding. Even in the Western countries where 18 is a cutoff line, there are exceptions that people give. And there is something here that they call common law marriage. And there is like many apparatuses. But we come to a country, I don't know, like the Philippines, I'm not aware of the details, but other countries in Arab. And then we have a cutoff line that we copy without the fiqh of it, without the depth, without allowing, let's say, people under that line to marry if they are mature enough, and to criminalize. But I do agree with the criminalization of marrying young children. I think this is the role of the state to protect younger ones, because it's a matter of policy. Even if you think it's allowed in Islam, I don't think it is, but even if you think it's allowed in Islam to marry somebody who's 10 or 11, the state has a responsibility to protect people. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he intervened when he was a Khalifa radiallahu anhu. He intervened in some of the family law because he thought there is a maslaha, the talaq 3 times or whatever, for example, that he intervened in. He said, no, the Prophet ﷺ allowed that, but I'm not going to allow it. Was he going against the Sunnah? No, he is a policymaker. And policy sometimes could make a change in the law, as long as they're not negating anything essential in Islam. They could make a change in the family law for the sake of the higher interest. So a court today could make a change on the custody that the Prophet ﷺ judged, or on other arrangements, for example, because it is for the better interest of the society. So I hope this answers the question. It's a long story.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Bless you.
Okay. We have another one raising his hand. Vivo V2131.
Yeah,
can you please introduce to us yourself before? stating your question. Vivo.
Maybe they're not paying
All right.
attention.
Maybe.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Yes, we can.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Prof Jasser Auda, for your very enlightening presentation. I have been following your speeches and lectures in many occasions, but only now I have an opportunity to directly ask this question to you. And thank you very much for the organizer. My question is very simple, actually. Having heard all the questions raised by some participants, I believe that Muslim society seems to have common problems regarding their their presence in this modern world, like the issue of child marriage, issue of LGBT, feminism, gender, and all these kind of things. I am in Indonesia, Prof Jasser, and I'm sure that you have been, following also the issues in Indonesia, especially concerning Islamic thought. And I think, as you know, also that in Indonesia, Islamic thought seems to have been very much influenced by Western Orientalist way of thinking, or if I can say, the liberal trends of reform. I mean, as we know that almost all Muslim scholars, I think, agree on the issue of the need to reform Islamic thought or Islamic studies. But the question is that the way, the methodology, and all these kind of things, which one should be followed? And you have presented your argument, your thought on this way of reforming, and I'm very much inclined to the way that you are to the way you are reforming this Islamic thought, basing on authenticity of Islam, that is Quran and Sunnah. But my question is that, how do you view the reform that is proposed, like those scholars like Muhammad Arkun, Abid Jabiri, Nasser Abu Zaid, and all these people, all these scholars also on the name of reform, something that seems to me is very much against the very fundamental things of Islam, or even very fundamental things of our heart, because they try to legalize LGBT, legalize everything that seems to be contradictory to the very principle of Islamic law. And that's my question. I hope that I can get your answer on this question, Prof. Thank you very much.
Barakallahu feek, akhi. Barakallahu feek. Ma can say for this.
Yeah.
Allah akbar. Now, akhi, you answered the question. You answered the question that yes, people could be reformist and they offer new thought. But if you are going to change fundamental issues in Islam, then you are not allowed to do that. I mean, we reject if somebody is going to change fundamental issues in Islam, then we should reject them, and Islam will go on. You mentioned a few names without commenting on particular names. Everyone has something reasonable to offer and acceptable and new, any of those thinkers that have a following and they publish books and all of that. But also there are things that are rejected and not acceptable. And it depends on your understanding of the Islamic principles. Like, for example, you mentioned Dr. Shahrur. When he dealt with the ayah in Surah An-Nisa, الرجال قوامون على النساء, men are caregivers, take carers of women. Men take care of women, right? الرجال قوامون على النساء. And then he goes back to the Arabic language and say, well, rijal is not always men. A rijal could be woman, and nisa could be man. And then we get into, as you mentioned, like blurring the lines of the males and females in Islam. No, that is not, even if the language permits that, that's unacceptable interpretation of the language. Not everything that the language permits is something that we are allowed to interpret. What is the bottom line? The bottom line is not my opinion or yours. The bottom line is the rest of the Quran. Is the rest of the Quran really talking about al-rijal and nisa in a relative way like that? Anybody who is rijal, the husband could be a wife and the wife could be a husband. And when the Quran talks about an-nisa breastfeeding their children, that is rijal, that is a man doing that? Or about men, I don't know, that these are women? No, you see what I mean? So basically, I'm saying that you could benefit from reading for these authors who take a postmodern, they call them in Arabic al-hadathiyun, but really in the reality, they are ma ba'da hadathiyun. They are postmodern. They are not modernists. They take a deconstructionist approach. I wrote critiquing Dr. Nasr Abu Zaid's approach to the post-linguist school or neo-linguistic deconstructionism that he took in some of his books. So I critiqued that. I critiqued recently Dr. Shahrur on some of this. So I agree with you that new thought is welcomed, but as long as you don't break something fundamental or principle in Islam. And if you find me breaking anything principle, don't take it from me because I might make mistakes in judgment. We're all human beings. So when I tell you, for example, and I put a lecture on the chat about the age of marriage of Aisha radiallahu anha, al-Mu'mineen. So if you think that this is against the principle of Islam, I would tell you no. The principle of Islam is that the Prophet ﷺ married somebody who carried the responsibility of being a mother of the believer. And I believe that people who took the hadith that Bukhari narrated for authentic and did not listen to the scholars who critiqued it from the past and the present are people who go against a principle of Islam. So I differ with them on this. And I think it's necessary that we correct that business of Muhammad ﷺ marrying somebody at the age of 6. That's ridiculous. Allahu a'lam. Jazakumullah khair.
Okay, we have three, it's 11:24, so maybe these three last questions.
Sure.
We have from Ayman Nasser.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, my question is, in our part of the world, especially if we talk about the Indian subcontinent, there is a need for the revival of Islamic studies because the way we are taught the subject is not as it should be. The subject has led to the stagnation. The subject, we should open our minds, but it led to stagnation of the minds. So what is the need and how the revival should be done? And most importantly, if the revival should be done, how is to be done in current political situations where we cannot even think of as even a small step, because it can lead to many situations as we all are aware of as a Muslim living in Indian subcontinent. Thank you, sir.
Barakallahu feekum. Well, the Muslims in India have major challenges. I was active with the Fiqh Academy of India for a few years during the time of my friend, rahimahullah, Sheikh Amin Uthmani, and I traveled India north and south by train, so I can speak from experience. I think there are necessary changes that have to happen in the scholarly bodies in India. I think going by the traditional model and copying the curriculum from the past without a contemporary approach to Islam or linking the fiqh that students study with the reality of Muslims in India, I think that this is committing suicide, because Islam has to, as a thought and as Islamic institutions, Islam has to be in contemporary times. We cannot continue to do that. I think that banning women from the mosques in India is a mistake and is wrong from a fiqh perspective. I wrote a whole book on that. And I know that my brothers in India who are scholars don't like this, but they are wrong in not allowing women to be part of the mosque, and therefore not allowing the mosque to be the place it should be as a center for the Muslim community, not a temple. They are dealing with mosques as, in a very templist way. I think in India, the politics are complex, and there has to be involvement of Muslims in the politics of India. And that requires major changes in the educational norms of Muslims. Muslims in India have to learn English. They cannot just learn Arabic or Urdu in the north or Malayalam only in the south. They have to learn English in order to be part of the educational system and to be part of the politics of the country and to be able to defend themselves, because without Muslims being part of the society, they cannot defend themselves. I believe that Muslims in India has to deal with the banks because they have to stand on their feet economically, even if they agree with the banks on something that you could consider halal business or whatever. If there is a market, banks listen because banks trade in money. And if you bring enough money, banks will allow you to trade. I don't think that Muslims should isolate themselves in India from the educational system and the banking system. I think that is adding to the suicide mentality of just going to a closed road and doing things that are harmful. I believe that there has to be a voice for the new movements and the youth movements in India. Maqasid Institute, we are opening a branch in India recently, and we already gave training to SIO of the student organization. I can connect you with my brothers and sisters there. And actually, if you would like to contribute, we would like for the new generation of Muslims who are well educated and they have a good heart to start with and then a good mind to contribute to the welfare of Muslims in India and not to continue on the same path, which is not a good path for Islam in India.
Okay, we have another one from Said Sharifin. I think he's from Australia.
MashaAllah.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Ustaz Jasser Auda, for your wonderful presentation. I'm a secondary school teacher. I'm involved with the Quranic studies teaching in Australia. It's a government exam for year 12 exam. I come from the perspective of year 12 students and the challenges they face is not new to you in Canada. I would like to know the recent development of LGBTQ and the challenges it poses within the Muslim community and wider community, where the pro-LGBT forces almost taken over every platform in Australia. Recent elections also reflected on this one. What are the systematic approach you are proposing for LGBT in the Western world and non-Western world, where we as a teachers, I can bring an army of teachers who is willing to volunteer their time in this area?
والله يا أخي يعني we have to deal with this group as a different group. These are, like, from our perspective as Muslims, sins. And as long as they're not forcing us to do sins, they are different. And you live in Australia, I live in Canada. These are secular societies and everybody live the way they like, kind of thing. So my point is, my neighbor here could be alcoholic. As long as he's not forcing on me to be alcoholic, he has his freedom to be alcoholic. I advise him that this is not good for him. I don't think that alcoholism is a good trait, as much as I don't think that zina is a good trait. So if I'm asked about the moral opinion of Islam, I say it. But neighbors and friends and employees and people, they can live their lives as long as they don't force us on a particular lifestyle. We don't force people to do things our way, and they should not force us to do things their way. If they force us, as we see in the schools here in Canada, and I'm sure in Australia, because everywhere that lobby is a very strong lobby today, we have to seek alliances, the right alliances. Like, for example, here in the Fiqh Council of North America, we made a collaboration with a number of Jewish organizations in California, like Orthodox Jews. They are not necessarily, supporters of Israel or any of that. They are just Jews. They are American Jews, have nothing to do with the Israeli question. And we collaborated with them on legal action on some issues to take these people to court. That I have a right as a Muslim school to teach certain things. I have a right as a Muslim teacher to refuse to take part in some of the lessons in terms of freedom and so on. So my point is, we should look for the right alliances. I don't think that it is right that Muslims make alliances with the liberals on social issues and the conservatives on economic issues. I think we should flip that. We should make alliances on economic issues with the left and on social issues with the right. But I'm noticing that Muslims in the West have the wrong equation. We are liberal socially and we are, capitalist economically, and this is not Islamic anymore. فجزاكم الله خير. I hope this answers the question.
One more quick question, sir. Do you have anything in the Maqasid point of view, written anything around this area, especially children, Muslim children, what they say, they used to hate this LGBT thing because of the dominance of the media. Now they say, sir, leave it alone, let them do it. So sort of acceptance are growing. So I would like to know your Maqasid Institute, any initiative in this area. I really like what you said, working with the other Abrahamic communities. We do here in Australia as well. We would like to sort of work under person like your guidance in this area, so we don't go the wrong way.
Allah bless you. No, in the Maqasid Institute, we did not produce research in this, but I was involved in other research produced here in Canada by the Muslim Association of Canada. You can email me. I can send you the report that they published for the teachers of their Islamic schools, guidelines on how to differentiate between the social issues and the legal issues and the medical issues. It's complex. It's a complex issue. I can send you that report, inshallah, if you email me, inshallah.
Thank you, sir. Jazakallah.
Okay, we have one last from Al Jamasali before we will end this webinar.
Inshallah.
Al, please proceed with your question very briefly.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I really like the notion of the formulating new formula in sociological point of view. Anyhow, my question is about the woman participating in the politics, most especially in this Muslim society. So I just wanted to
woman participating. Sorry, woman participating in what?
In politics.
In policy.
In context, in politics. In a context of democracy.
Okay.
Politics.
Sure.
So I just wanted to know your point of view.
So question perhaps, Brother Darwin, in policy?
In politics.
In politics. Yeah, why not? Why not? That's my answer. I don't know. Why not? Is politics haram for women or something? I don't know. We have, the only king that is reasonable, other than the prophets in the Quran, is a woman, actually. Why not? I'm not sure why. There's nothing in Islam that prevents women from participating in politics. and fighting in wars and being judges or lawyers or traders or teachers or doctors or artists or sports women or anything. What is haram in Islam is known. If she is in the market, doesn't do riba. If she is in the sports, doesn't, uncover her aura. If she is, I don't know, fighting, then this kind of thing, like, it's just, there is no difference between men and women in the areas of politics or muamalat in general. There's no difference. There are differences in some issues related to the men's and women's roles in the family. And that's the only differences in Islam between men and women. Aisha radiallahu anha participated in the politics of her time. And she's al-Mu'mineen as well. Like, she's even supposed to cover and isolate, the Quran is saying. But she participated in the politics. She had her political opinions. She had her political mistakes. She participated in major politics of her time. You could take her as an example. You could agree or disagree with some of her decisions on the political issues. But why not? Why not? Perhaps a different seminar on women and Islam. I left in the chat a lecture that I've given, I remember, in Malaysia, on women and Islam. I have some information there for those who are asking about issues of child marriages and the status of women in Islam in general. It's a couple-hour lecture, and it was in IAIS in Kuala Lumpur. So inshallah, you can refer to that lecture as well. Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Auda. Much as we want to entertain more questions, but it's 11:38, and I think it's already midnight in Canada.
It's 10:30. It's 10:38 here in the evening. It's all right, inshallah.
Okay. Anyway, Dr. Auda's email is in the chat box, and for those who would like to ask more, you can directly engage him. And also, he shared some of the reading materials and lectures. He has also several lectures in YouTube. You can just search it for more. So once again, thank you so much for those who participated and shared their questions. And again, also, we are very, very honored to have our lecturer sharing his wisdom. And we do hope that this is not the first and the last. We look forward to engaging you more in the future and to have you in our university in this country.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Congratulations for the new building, and inshallah the new building will bring fresh ideas and new students and big contribution, inshallah. Be more than happy to be part of that. Jazakumullah khair. Pray for us, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you. Thank you. And to formally end our program, I'd like again to call Ustaz Lukman for our closing prayer. Ustaz Lukman.
كفارة المجلس سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك الحمد لله رب العالمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Ameen. Walaikum assalam.
Ameen.
So that ends our webinar, and thank you so much again for our speaker and our participants. Stay safe, and until next time.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير يا
فرصة
شيخ.
طيبة، فرصة طيبة دكتور ذو الكفلي، والله جزاك الله خير أخي. جزاك الله خير. We'll be in touch inshallah. And
نراكم إن شاء الله هنا في الجامعة إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله إن شاء الله.
حياكم الله وبياكم يا شيخنا. جزاكم الله خير.
Nice meeting you. بارك الله فيكم.
الله لكم السلامة والعافية والصحة.
يا رب يا رب. Nice meeting you أخي دكتور داروين.
ما شاء الله.
Allah bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Darwin.
Likewise.
Dean Wadi, thank
Okay,
you very
everyone.
much.
Stay safe.
شكرا جزيلا. Thank you very much for the organizer.
شكرا.
Brother Darwin, I didn't get the resources, brother.